Hey, Frank.
Okay, let's quickly. Most people are not around. What's going on? Most people don't want to come to class. What's happening? Okay, so good morning, everyone. I welcome you to today's class. Remember, we said we are moving to Angular this week. So we'll be creating our front end. We have learned how to create our server, the Express server and Node.js, right? So we also have been able to create our database using MongoDB, and we are able to connect to the database, whether locally on your machine or to the cloud using Atlas. So now our focus is going to be, we have main stack, we have main stack. So our focus is going to be on Angular and React. So we will start with Angular first. If we are able to complete that on time, we might at a point move to React. So we have main stack, we also have main. So we have done with our MongoDB, our Express server, and Node.js. So we are looking at Angular, and as time goes on, we are looking at React and develop our front end. Right, so we already have the server, we already have the database, right? So we are going to use Angular to create our front end. So that will be the focus of this week. So we have a lot to work on this week, and I will encourage us to, we will go through the slide now and see how we can start off the Angular this morning, if time permits. So we'll just quickly go through the slide and we'll see how we can start off the Angular, right? So let me just pull up the slide. You already have the slide on your eCentennial. We are in week 8. I hope every one of us can access that, right? It's open to everyone now. So if you go to your course shell, we are not around on Thursday. Was it Thursday? I said it wasn't around on Thursday. Right? Okay, so you're welcome. The HDMI is, okay, let me use the VGA. Okay, the VGA is working. The HDMI has issue. No problem. So I will encourage us to go through the slide, but we'll try and start going through the slide together as we start off, and we'll see how we can start the Angular, like I've mentioned. So while you spend time, please go through the slide. As we go along as well with the hands-on, we'll be referring to the slides as well. So let's look at the Angular architecture. So if you go to your course shell, like I mentioned, you have all the slides. We look at how we are going to look at the introduction to Angular and TypeScript primer. We also look at the Angular architecture, the Angular modules, Angular data binding, Angular directives, Angular services, and Angular routing. So we'll also be using the routes here, right? And we'll also be using the services in Angular. Right. So I'll just quickly flip through this slide. As we start the hands-on, also we'll be referring to some of the things we have in the slide. Right. So I'll read out some few things there. I'll try to explain, for the slide itself is self-explanatory. So introducing Angular. So Angular JS was a front-end JavaScript framework which is used to design the applications, web application, using the model view controller architecture, right? So Angular also has extended its functionality to the HTML using some attributes that you can use to bind your JavaScript logic with HTML elements. So that is the Angular that we're going to be using also have the ability to extend HTML, and it also gives some features that you can use to manipulate your DOM. I hope you can still remember our DOM, document object model, from our 213 class, and also it helps you to be able to manipulate your client-side template using two-way data binding. We'll still talk about data binding as we moved on, right? So AngularJS also has helped to improve the application code and structure and how you can test your application that has a MVC and dependency injection. So we'll also be using TypeScript, right? We'll also be using TypeScript. You know that TypeScript is a type programming language that was created by Microsoft, right? And it uses object-oriented foundation like your C#, your Java also. So we know that TypeScript is just like, you can say, is a higher version of JavaScript, right? So if you already know JavaScript, it's just a little bit that you a little bit to it, right? So so like I mentioned, code written in TypeScript is transpiled into JavaScript code, either the ES3, ES5, or ES2015, and it can run on any of the modern web browser, right? So you are also going to familiarize yourself using TypeScript. So you know JavaScript, you know TypeScript. So TypeScript will be of a great help to you in when we are using Angular. So you need to install the TypeScript. You need to install the TypeScript, right? So if you don't have it, if you have not yet installed the TypeScript, you can go ahead and do that. So once you go to your command prompt or the terminal on your window, just type npm. You have the slide on your Sentinel, or probably you want to snap it and do the installation. Okay, you can go ahead. So once you go to your command prompt, or you open your terminal in the VS Code, you can quickly npm install TypeScript space -g as global. Right. So if you go to your command prompt, if you install that, npm install TypeScript -g, you can go to your command prompt cmd, or you can so once you install that, So once you install that, you can check the version of the TypeScript that you have installed. So you can check the version of the TypeScript that you have installed. To check the version, type TSC space dash version. TSC space dash version. So you go back to your command prompt. So it will tell you the version of the TypeScript that you have. So it will tell you the version of the TypeScript that you have installed. So remember to install the TypeScript, you will need the TypeScript. So go to your command prompt, npm install TypeScript space -g. You are trying to install it as global. So once you are done, you can check the version. To check the version, tsc space dash, or if you want to say minus version to check it. Right.
Does it only work if you're in sudo?
That's Mac.
Yeah. I can do this.
Homebrew. Can you check homebrew?
Yeah, first key has an error, but I wanted to do sudo.
Okay, check
Yeah,
it's 4.4. You already have it. 4.8.4. So I have 4.8.4 as well. So you are able to install, right? Okay. So you use the sudo command, right?
Yeah.
Okay, for those using Mac, you go to use your homebrew. Right. So understanding the TypeScript, that is developers productivity feature. So one of the productivity feature that TypeScript gives is access control key. It helps you to be able to create a class constructor using the syntax, which helps to prevent some common coding errors. So TypeScript also includes a package, or TypeScript package includes a compiler that helps to process the TypeScript files and produces pure JavaScript that can be used, or that can be used to execute the JavaScript at the runtime. So that is what TypeScript basically do. So it helps you to be able to run that pure JavaScript. You have the TypeScript package, it has a compiler in it. So it uses that compiler to process the TypeScript files and to produce pure JavaScript that can be executed by JavaScript runtime, such as your Node.js or a browser. So this is a representation of that. You have the TypeScript, it has a compiler, so it processes that TypeScript to produce pure JavaScript that can be executed at runtime. So your TypeScript, even as you use the TypeScript, there is always a compiler that will process it so that at the runtime it will run it as JavaScript. So that is how TypeScript work. So the combination of that JavaScript and the TypeScript features will make your application to be flexible and dynamic. Remember we said the application that we build with our HTML, CSS is just static. So it is JavaScript that makes it to be more dynamic, that creates more interaction on it. So it makes it to be flexible and dynamic in nature. So that means that the project that uses TypeScript still makes use of a wide range of third-party JavaScript packages that are available. So if you are using TypeScript, that is, your TypeScript is using third-party packages available for JavaScript, right? So as we're going to be working with Angular, with React, with Vue.js as our front-end framework, we are going to be using TypeScript. We are also going to be using JavaScript. Remember, we said the TypeScript basically a compiler will still process it to become JavaScript, right? So we are going to be using that as well. So any of this front end, but we said for the focus of the course, we are going to start with Angular, right? So if time permits, we might go a little bit to React. So there's another one called Vue.js. We also have another one called Vue.js, front-end framework, right? So we have Angular, we have React, we have Vue.js. But we are going to start off with Angular, and for us to be able to use the Angular as our front-end framework, we have already worked on the server, the Node.js, Express.js. We have also worked with our MongoDB database. So our focus now is to create the front end using any of these front end framework, Angular or React, and we'll see how we can also connect it to our database that we already have and connect it to our server as well. Right. So TypeScript features, you can apply it selectively, which means you can choose some features that you want to use, right? So, like I mentioned, we are going to be using TypeScript, we are going to be using JavaScript. Remember, your TypeScript is just like, I call it like a level up from your types, from your JavaScript. So remember, it will still require a compiler to convert it to JavaScript as runtime. Right. So types, basically, let's look at types. They are a major part of every programming language, including JavaScript. So if you look at, even when we did some installation previously, we installed the types. Like when we installed Passport, when we installed the JWE token, we also installed the types, right? So types, they are a major part of every programming language, including JavaScript. So including JavaScript, right? So TypeScript support basic JavaScript types and also allow developers to create their own types. They allow developers to create their own types. So types can be JavaScript primitive types, as we have seen in this code. Also, types script will also allow you to work with arrays. So TypeScript will also allow you to work with arrays. So you can have the JavaScript primitive type, like in this example, you declare your variable name, you assign your value to it. You can also work with an array, and I'm sure in JavaScript we have done this, right, in JavaScript. So for whether you have it as primitive type or you use it as an array, they are transferred into JavaScript array declaration. So we also have what we call the any type. Any type. Any type. So the any type represents any free-form JavaScript value. That is JavaScript value. The value of any will go through a minimal static type checking. So as it checks the transpiler, it will support all operations as JavaScript value. So any type we will be looking at, we'll also see the any type and we will use it. So all properties of the any value can be accessed, and any value can also be called as a function with an argument list. Right. So in this example, so the any type we also refer to it as a super type of all types. And whenever the TypeScript cannot interfere a type, the any type will be used. So the any type is just like a type that is readily available for use, right? So when the TypeScript cannot use any type, any available type, it should use that any type, right? So you'll be able to use any type either explicitly or not, right? So like for example, we say variable x is any. So if you use this any type, the types available at this point. Right? So it has what we call the any type, and the any type we said can access any value. The any type can be used to access any value. Right. So I will quickly go to, we can still read this up. Right. So basically, the TypeScript, as we have mentioned, will keep the structure of your project, and it also helps you to keep the interfaces running and intact. So I will leave us to read the decorators of the type and the interface while we move on to, like I said, I want us to go through the slide. You can still access the slide on your own. So let's look at the Angular architecture. The Angular architecture. Like we said, we are going to be using Angular as our front end. So let's look at the Angular architecture. So the Angular, or the goal of using Angular, is to bring our HTML and our JavaScript together in a manageable and scalable way in order to build a client application. So remember I said we're going to be using Angular as our front end. So why are we using Angular, or why Angular? Why Angular? So the reason why we are using Angular is just for you to be able to bring your HTML, your JavaScript, to bring them together so that we can manage them together to build our client-side application. So that is why we are using Angular. So as we start using that Angular, we'll be doing some installation like I mentioned, and once we do some installation, we are going to see what we call components. We have the header component, the footer component, the HTML component, right? So Angular will use a component-based approach. So once we do the installation, we are going to be seeing components. So Angular uses a component-based approach with entities, with supporting entities, such as we have services, directives. We also have routing. We are using route as well when we work with Angular. So it uses a component-based approach. So once you install it, you will see header component, footer component, everything component. You are going to see something component, right? So it is component based. So if you look at this structure, right, it gives us an idea of how Angular works, right? So we are going to be having like dependency injection. We are also going to do the authentication. And in doing the authentication, we are going to be using the authentication template. So we have an authentication template, and during that authentication we are going to be carrying out some events, right? Some events. You are familiar with some events, clicking, loading, and everything. So when you do your authentication, maybe on clicking on maybe the submit button or maybe login button, right? So there's going to be like an event binding that authentication. So as we move on, we will see how that is done, right? So our single web page application that we are used to, right? So the web app were developed to follow what we call a round-trip model. Generally, when we talk about web development or web application, right, the simple one we already know, we call it round-trip. That is, the browser will request, make a request to the server or request the initiation of the HTML. You launch your HTML in the browser window. And once you launch your HTML in the browser window, there's always an interaction such that you can have like a link or an event, right? Let's say, for instance, we have a form on our HTML page. We have a form on our HTML page. And on the form on our HTML page, after filling up the entries, there's going to be an event, maybe click. So once you click, it will submit that form probably to the database, to the backend. So the user interaction in that, such as maybe clicking or linking a submit form, will allow the browser to request and to receive the completed HTML document, right? Once you fill up the form, you hit on the submit button, it takes it to the database, to the backend. So this is a client where you put in your form or your request, and it goes to the server. Also, once you make a request to the server, it will bring back the response and display it on the client's computer, right? So this is like the traditional, or we call it a round trip. No, let's say the traditional, we already know this. To make a request to the server, the server on getting that request, like we did in our JavaScript class, you say you make a request, you can use the XML HTTP request object to make a request to the server, and the server will return the response back to the client side. So we refer to that as a round trip application. A round trip application. So a lot of our current web development is still for round trip application. It's still for round trip application. But there are some disadvantages to round trip application. There are some disadvantages to round trip application. So round trip application that I've explained has its own disadvantage. One, they make the user wait until the next HTML document is requested and loaded. Right. From our knowledge of 125, right, we talk about synchronous and asynchronous way of sending requests to the server. Right. We said if you send it maybe in a synchronous way, you have to wait for a connection to the server before it will start executing your JavaScript, before it will load the response back. But if it's asynchronous, asynchronous means as the client and the server is connecting together, it will continue to execute the JavaScript. So the round trip that we already know will, make the user wait until the next HTML document is requested or loaded. And apart from that, they require larger server-side infrastructure to process all the requests and manage all the application states. So for that type, it will require large server, right? It will require large server. That is why at times when you make a request to the server, before you get the response, it will be slow, right? So it requires a large server, and they also require more bandwidth. It requires more bandwidth because HTML document has to be self-contained, right? So it has to be self-contained. So it might require more bandwidth. Right, for this type of application that we are trying to build using the main stack or main stack development, let's say for instance, in an organization, we want the user to be able to use both the web app and the mobile app, right? Both the web app and the mobile app, and we want both users to be able to store their entries into the same database, right? Into the same database, they will have the same back end, right? So for instance, now we are using MongoDB as our database, right? Last week we looked at JWT authentication, and we said we can be able to send an API, right? So the front end can consume that API. So as we go on, we'll still talk about that as we go on. So this is a comparison. Before we get to the comparison, we say Angular excel in single page application and especially and also in complex round trip application. So you can use Angular for that single page or complex application, right? So if you go to this slide, this gives a comparison between Angular, React, and Vue.js. Remember we said you can use the front end, you can either use Angular, React, and Vue.js, right? But we said the focus of the class is for us to use Angular, and if time permits, we'll use React as well at a point. So there's another one called Vue.js. I have not explored that anyway, right? So, but I know some of us, maybe you have heard of Vue.js, you can research on it, and at least have a knowledge on Vue.js. So the main difference between the framework is the developer's experience. The main difference between these three front-end framework is the developer's experience. So for Angular will require you to use TypeScript. So please take note of that when you are working with either Angular, when you are working with either React, or you want to use Vue.js. We are using Angular first, and I'll just talk about the difference between the framework, then we'll go to routing, so that we can, I want us to at least do the installation Angular this morning before this class, right? So Angular will require the use of TypeScript to be effective. So that is why we said we are going to be using TypeScript, right? So we all know, some of us have used C, Sharp or Java. So and some of us have started using TypeScript also. So Vue.js and React. So Angular uses TypeScript, but Vue.js and React, they don't require TypeScript. So Vue.js and React, I'm sure that is why most people like React. They like to use React. In React, you don't need TypeScript. So you don't need TypeScript. So React and Vue.js don't require TypeScript. Right. So they link towards, basically what React does is that it mixes HTML, JavaScript, and CSS content together in a simple file. So React and Vue.js don't need TypeScript. So for those of us that are not familiar with TypeScript, I'm sure you'll be comfortable using React, right? So React, Vue.js, you don't need TypeScript, but if you are going to work with Angular, you have to know and use more of TypeScript. So that is the major difference between Angular, React, and TypeScript. So if you are okay with your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, then maybe your default front end framework might be React, right? I know most people use React. So, but for Angular, at least you must have knowledge of TypeScript, right? So, with that in mind, we need to know more about TypeScript in this Angular. So we are going to be using a little of TypeScript in our Angular as we proceed, right? So, and remember we said I'm going to be using model view controller. So let's look at data binding, Angular directives, Angular services, because we will be binding with data binding in Angular. We'll also be using directories. We will also be looking at this Angular services routing as well. So let's look at data binding. We'll just take a few examples, because as we proceed, as we start writing our scripts, we are going to work with data binding. So we'll just look at some few examples on how to bind our data. So one of the greatest features of Angular is data binding ability. So Angular has that ability, that data binding ability, right? So Angular data binding basically provide a straightforward way for you to be able to manage your data between your component class and the render view. Remember I said in Angular we are going to be having header components, footer component, everything components. Once we do the installation, you'll see that. So basically it will help you to bind the component class and when you want to render the view. So the way of binding data from your component class is to use a template called interpolation. So to bind your data, you use a template called interpolation. Interpolation will bind the value of the class property with the template using double curly bracket syntax. So let's look at a simple example. Here we have import component from Angular. Remember we are using the component. So we have the components. We have the selector, which is equals to the min app, the template. Here we are looking at the heading style 1 in this application. Heading style 1 element, right? Heading style 1 element in the application. This is just an example. So we'll export the class app component. We are trying to export the class called app component, then the title, we are using the main application. So if you look at that, the title property of the app component inside the HTML, see how it's being, the title property of the app component class inside the template of the HTML, see how it binds the title property together. So remember we said it's going to use a curly, it's going to use, if you go back to the previous, it says it will use a double curly bracket syntax. To bind the data, it will use a double curly bracket syntax. So if you go back to that example, it's binding this. So it's using double curly bracket. So take note of that. Once we start binding the data, as we go on with the Angular, if you see this, you know that it's doing a data binding. It's binding the data using double curly bracket syntax. So we have one-way data binding, right? So we have one-way data binding, and we have event binding. You can bind your event, you can bind your data. We have property binding as well. So let me just take it one after the other. We'll see how we can bind our event. So we have property binding. Property binding. You can bind the property of your element. So we call that one-way data binding. One-way data binding will be property binding. And basically what does it do? It will allow you to bind your HTML element property value with a component property value of any other template expression. So this is done by using square bracket as follows. So if we talk about property binding, it will help you to bind the property of the element on your page. And to do the property binding uses square bracket. So wherever you have a square bracket in your scripts in Angular, you know that you are binding the property of that element. You are binding the property of that element. So in this case, we are looking at the button, right? We are looking at the button here. So we are trying to bind the property of this button. The property of this button is disabled, right? The button is disabled. So to do that binding, since this is the property of this element button, we use a square bracket. So property binding is done by using a square bracket. So in this example, basically, the Angular will render the button as disabled. It will render this button. That means the button will not be active. This is the property of the button. So it will render it as disabled, since we have set the isButton disabled property to true. So this is a property. We say button disabled, and we say isButton disabled. The property of it, which we have bind here, we have set it to true. So the button will not be active. So apart from property binding, we have what we call event binding. We have what we call event binding. I'm sure we can still remember our event. Click, submit, load, unload, right? So you can also bind the event binding. So in order for the component to respond to the dump event generated from the view, Angular provides you with the mechanism of event binding. So all you have to do is to set the event name inside a round bracket. So if you are binding your event, you use a round bracket. You use a round bracket. You use a round bracket. This is an event, right? On click. So when user clicks on this button, it will execute this function, right? So if you have a round bracket around any event, we call that event binding, right? We call this event binding. So so it has ability, you can do your event binding with Angular. So remember we said we can do property binding, right? You can do interpolation binding. For interpolation binding, you use double curly bracket. For property binding, you use the square bracket to bind the property of the element. For event binding, you use the round bracket to, bind that event, just like we have in this example. So if you see this as we proceed, you should understand what it is. So it also does, apart from the one-way binding that we have mentioned, and we have given several examples of the one-way binding, Angular also does two-way binding. Two-way binding. So it does two-way binding. So as we proceed, we'll also see the two-way binding. So for two-way binding, is you use a combination of the syntax of the round and bracket, square bracket. So two-way binding is you use both round and square brackets. So if you see the round and square brackets in your script, know that that is two-way binding. You have the round and the square bracket, so you need the combination of round and square brackets as we have in this example. So if you look at this example, the NG model. So we have a round and you have a square bracket. So that is two-way binding. We'll still talk about that as we move on in the as we start working with Angular. I'm just trying to point our attention to it so that when I'm writing the code, you see double curly brace, you see your round bracket, you see square bracket, or you see round bracket and square bracket, you should be able to understand what that script is doing at that time, right? So it has the ability of doing the two-way binding as we have mentioned, right? So apart from the Angular binding, we also have Angular directive, Angular service. So let's look at the Angular directives and the Angular service. We also have Angular routing. So let's see how we can, once it's 9:30 or 9:35, wherever we get to with the theory, I will stop so that we can start the installation. I want us to start the installation this class before Thursday because we have a lot of things to do, right? So, but I'm just trying to provide like a soft landing so that when we see some few things in our scripts, we won't be wondering, what is this doing? What is this doing? Because once we start coding and typing, I might say it, I might not explain it, right? Because once we start coding, we'll be looking at for errors, how to resolve errors, right? So we might not get to say more about it. So that is why I'm taking out time to explain how to explain some of the features that we have in Angular. So let's look at Angular directives. Angular directives. So one of the basic operation, or Angular's basic operation, is to transform the dynamic template into views using set of instructions that we usually call directives. So directives is one that has to translate the templates into your views, right? So there are several types of directives, but the basic one that we'll be looking at is component. So we have the art component decorator, which will extend the directives decorator by adding a template to it. And we also have the selector property. Right. So if we look at the Angular directives, it uses attribute directives. It also uses attribute directives. So basically the attribute directives is what changes the behavior or the appearance of the DOM element, which we will see as we proceed. So the Angular directives or the Angular have several pre-built-in attribute directives. So we'll be seeing some of these directives which helps to translate our template into our views, right? So the Angular comes with several pre-built attribute directives, such as we have the ng class, the ng style, the ng model. The ng class helps to bind single or multiple classes of elements. The ng style, we have our CSS, right? So it is the ng style that helps to bind all our CSS, whether you have single or multiple or inline styles on any of the elements. It is the ng styles that helps to bind that, which we'll see as we proceed. We also have the ng model, which provides a two-way data binding over our form elements. We'll also be creating forms. Remember when we did the Express.js, when we used the EJS, we created forms, your contact form and so on, right? So this is the ng model that will create a two-way data binding over all the form elements that we are going to be creating. We also have the structural directives. So we have talked about the attribute directives, say Angular directives, we have the attribute directives, and we have explained the various attribute directives, the ng class, the ng style, which handles your CSS style, whether multiple or single, the ng model. So apart from the attribute directive, we have the structural directives. The structural directives helps to change our application DOM layout by removing and adding our DOM element, document object model. Remember, we have several elements on our HTML page. So it is the structural directive that helps to add. We want to add more elements, we want to remove. It is the structural directive that helps to do that. So Angular has three major structural directives that we ought to know. Three major structural directives. We have the ng if. Remember, we always have our if statement, right? So it is the ng if that provides a way to add or remove elements according to a condition, our conditional statement. It is the ng if that, we say if this is true, you should do this, right? So it is the ng if structural directives that helps to handle that. We also have our for statement, right? Like our for loop, right? So the ng for provides a way to create copies of an element based on a list of objects, right? When you create a for loop, it circles through, right? A list of objects. So it is the ng for that does that. Then we have ng switch. It helps to display single element out of a list element, right? So the structural directives use a mechanism called the HTML template. We also have what we call the component directives. The component directives. So every component is a directive. Every component is a directive. So let's look at this example. We have a component called sample component. We have a component called sample component, and the first thing we have there, the first line of statement, we are importing Angular. Import Angular as a component. And we say for the component, we have the selector, which is sample component, and the template. We are looking at heading style 1 element on that page. And the heading style 1 element we have are the components. This is just like a text within that heading style 1 element. So we export the component. So we can use the sample component as a directive in our app component class as follows. So we have the app component class, we create the app component class, we can redirect that into the app component class. That is the meaning of that statement, which we will see I'll try as much as possible when we are writing our script to explain this again. But in a situation whereby we don't get to explain, because once we start typing our script, we'll be focused on, is it running? Is it not running? Is it working? Is it not working? Right? So if you see any of this, just come back to the slide and read more to know what it is. Right. So that that is why I'm just taking out time to explain some few things now. So by the time we start working, we might not get the time to be able to explain that. So let's look at Angular services. Angular also uses services. Angular service. All of these, we will have it in your, once we are working with Angular at our front end. So services, they are essential part of Angular. So services, we can refer to services as classes that an application needs, the features that an application needs, right? So, for instance, you might want to manage your data, your logging in, and the application configuration. You want to manage your data, your logging in, and the application configuration, right? So, to be able to do this, you use the services. You use the services to manage your data, data management, logging, and your configuration. You'll be doing some configuration. So it is the services that helps to do that. So we can say that Angular services, we refer to them as classes. Classes with a defined functionality. Angular services can be referred to as classes with a defined functionality, right? So we also say we can do what we call dependency injection. So the dependency injection is just a software that is designed by the engineer, it was designed by an engineer called Martin Fowler. So, and the principle behind that dependency injection is the inversion of control in software development architecture, right? So, okay, I think too much of stories about this. We also have routes. I'm sure we all know what route is by now, right? Routing, we used it in when we were doing our Express server, right? So same, Angular has what we call routing. Routing, you know, it is a route that helps you to inject on your page, your navbar and everything, right? So you have to create a route of all your pages, right? So Angular has routing, and it is the routing that helps you to inject your pages on your navbar so that they can be displayed, right? So, okay. So let's quickly move on to the hands-on. We already know what routes is all about, right? So let's move on to the hands-on and let's see how we can do some installation. So I will encourage us to read that up, so that we won't have too much of stories this morning. Right, we all know what routing is, and as we take the hands-on, we'll still refer back to this. I'll still mention them, right? So, to know more about Angular, or to look at Angular's documentation, you can go to your browser window and go to angular.io. Angular.io. So the documentation, everything you need to know about Angular is, you know, you want to create a new Angular workspace, the command to use ng. Right. So you can go more to the documentation to see more about what is Angular, getting started. So to talk more about how you can do your installation and so on. Right. So you can still read this up on your own. You have access to that. Right. So what is Angular? You can, the Angular tools, you can read them up. What is ng-new? Ng-new, if you want to create a new Angular workspace, right? So ng is Angular new, then the name of the workspace you want to create. But before you start creating, you have to install, right? So we don't have Angular already. So I would like us to open, go to our VS Code, Visual Studio Code. If you go to, I think I've uploaded the start-up file, data file. But if you know we are on the same page with what we did last time in class, right? If you know you are at the same point, we stopped at the same point, you don't need to download it. But if you know you missed out some few things while we were maybe typing our code, then you need to download this. If you download and upload it in your VS Code, I have removed my URI. Right? Remember, URI is what you use to connect to your MongoDB database, right, in the cloud. Right. So I have removed it. So in case you get to the point, look, for now, we will not be doing any entry that will go to the database. Right. But I just want to encourage us and remind us that if you download this template, that is why I said no URI. There is no URI there. I've removed my own URI. So that is your connection string. So if you are using this, make sure you go back to where you have your connection string, copy and paste it in there. Right. So copy and paste it in there. So let's open that. Let me open mine. Just give me some few seconds. I need to create that for all the sections so that I won't override. This is section 004. Is it 4?
Yes.
Okay. For the first time. It's 4. Okay. So let me just rename it for your section, and I will. So once you open it, you can run it to be sure it's working. So just once you have it, run it, download one, and be sure it's working. And as I'm trying to copy and paste for the different sections so that I won't modify it for other sections. So just give me a second while I do that. But make sure every of your application, it's okay, it's free of error and it's still running. And you can also take this time out to look at the Angular.io, the documentation. Trying to do that, let me just put the installation. So to install Angular, so you can stop the server from running. If you know you can control C to stop the server from running. So to install Angular, to stop the server from running so that you can be able to do the installation, npm space install space -g. We are installing it as global add Angular /CLI, then you press your enter. So
So we can continue the file with the work last.
last week, it's okay, it's perfect. If you're on the same page, that is what I said. If you're on the same page, you continue with it. You don't need to download that because you already have your URI and everything is okay. Right. It's only for those probably you were not in class, you used that for a few things, or you were able to complete the code. You can download that, but once you download it, remember to put your URI because I've removed the URI, it's empty. So that by the time we need to connect to the database, remember I said we want to, the goal is to create like a shopping cart. So we'll do that on the front end, connect to the back end. Okay. So mine is still very slow, so we'll still continue, right? I hope it worked for everybody. We're able to install. Were you able to install? Did it work for everyone? Hello?
Yeah, I think so.
I hope no error. Right, okay, so because that's the first step, I want to make sure everybody gets that right. Right, so we are going to be creating a workspace called Bookstore. Remember that we have started, so we want to continue with that. So we're going to be creating a workspace called Bookstore in our project, inside our project. If you go back to the documentation, Angular's documentation, to create a new workspace, you use ng-new, the name of the workspace. Right. So apart from the workspace, workspace, sorry, I'm still trying to distill, but let's continue. So I don't want to overwrite it because of other sections. I want to copy and paste and start off file for other sections. So if you go to your Angular, if you look at the ng-new, if you have clicked on ng-new, right? Ng is Angular, then new, we're trying to create a new workspace. So ng-new, the name of the workspace you want to create. We are also going to add some options to it. The routing, we've talked about routing. Excuse me. So we're going to be adding some options to it. It has several options: commit, create application, default directory, run first, inline, template, minimal, project, routing. So we're going to be adding routing to it to generate a routing module for initial projects. Right. Also, we are going to add the Git. Says skip Git. That is, do not initialize a Git repository. We are going to, if you don't want to initialize it, you say false, but we are going to set ours to true. Right. So also, we are going to test. Skip test, do not generate spec.tsc test file for the new project. By default, it should be false, but we are going to say true because we need to test it. Right. So we are going to add all of these, the routing, the Git, and the testing. Also, we add the style. We will include style. Right. We are going to be using CSS. So the file extension or preprocessor used for style files, we will be using CSS. We have other style, SCSS, SASS, less, right? But we are going to be using CSS. I'm sure we are all familiar with the Cascade style sheet, so we are going to be using that. So after installation, we will create the new project. We will create a workspace for our project, and the a workspace, we'll create it for, we'll create a workspace for bookstore. Bookstore. So, and we add the routing, we'll add the style, we'll add the testing, we'll add also the kits. So to do that, okay, in order not to waste time. Sorry, my system is becoming slow. So, but in order not to waste time, I'll write it on the board. Once mine comes up, I'm trying to copy, make 3 duplicates of this start-off file so that I can use one for your class, one for the other section, so that I won't overwrite it. So to create the workspace for a new workspace, remember we said we are going to be adding the routing. So we have ng, I hope you can all see, ng space new. Ng is Angular. We are creating a new workspace called bookstore. Bookstore space dash dash. We want to add the routing to it. Routing equals to, we set the routing to true. Remember we said for the routing by default here, you have to choose whether true or false. So we want to set it to generate a routing model for our project. Then space skip test space skip test. So if you miss out the spelling, you can still come back here. That was why I opened this page. So skip test, skip space test. So skip test, routing through space dash dash, skip dash tests. Remember to put the dash there, else it will give you an error. Test equals to true. Want it to test it. We also add the style space dash dash. Let me. So you have space. There's a space here. After that space, let me just continue down here. After the space, you have dash dash style equals to, the style we want to use is CSS. So we have several options for the style, but we are going to use CSS. So equals to CSS. So space dash dash skip git. You want to skip though, taking it to the git repository, space dash dash skip dash git. By default is false, but we are going to set it to true. Right, so space dash dash skip dash git, just the way you have it there. We set it to be equals to true. So once you are done, you press enter. So if you are successful, right, just look at the side, the left-hand side of that your application. It will create a new books folder and it will install all the packages that Angular needs. So you can check. So let me see if I can quickly do mine. lowercase. That was why I projected just in lowercase, else there will be an error. You can see from the documentation, lowercase, please. Lowercase, and this is test, there is an S there. So is everybody successful in doing that? So check. Let me. Or skip dash gifts, skip dash tests. Is anyone successful in doing that? If you are successful, someone is still struggling by the side, kindly assist. Wow. Sorry. Can you please help me? I didn't plug it. Thank you. It's almost drained. Thank you. So, let me do my installation. NPM. NPM space. Install. Forward slash CLI. Enter. So, is it good, everyone? Good, error free. Okay, so just give me a second. Let me do that also. So we have ng space new bookstore space dash routing equals true space dash skip dash tests equals true space dash style equals CSS space dash skip dash git equals true. Enter. Okay, let's go to still
Thought it was like a bug or something.
okay. Let me just give it a second. Then
Oh,
we
yeah,
can-
it did. It's package is all successful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's.
I think it's 25
Let me just give it. I know my system is slow.
It's the first inspection.
Right. So in order not to keep us on hold, I hope it's still installing. Though my system is slow anyways. I need to remove some.
It's not only it's the baby.
I removed some over the weekend, but probably because I worked on it over the weekend, I've added more. So probably I should have removed before. Okay, so successfully, so you should have this package installed successfully, right? So if your system is slow, just don't terminate it, just hold on for it, right? Right, so if you look at it on the left hand side of where you have your, you will see that the bookstore, it has created the folder called bookstore, right? We all have this folder called bookstore. So we will rename this bookstore folder. Remember what we are trying to create? We are trying to create the front end, our client side, right? So we name the bookstore as client. So right click on it and rename it. Click on rename, change it to client, CLIENT. So rename that bookstore, right click on it. That's our client side. I will rename as client, CLIENT. Oh, already exists at this location. My God, I hope I'm not using the same. Okay, so just to so use client, please. If I think I already have that, is reading the one I did on Saturday and Sunday yesterday night. So I already created clients. So please don't say client one, right? Please don't say client one, use client. I will rectify that. So it's still reading, or maybe I should open the one I used on, I worked on. Okay, I'll open the one I worked on last time so that I won't. Okay, I'll leave it as client, but by Thursday I will open the one I've used. Okay, so we have renamed that folder as client. Remember, we're trying to create the front end. So if you go back to that client folder, there is a folder called SRC. So open the client folder. There's a folder called SRC. Right, so in the SRC folder, open that SRC folder. Are we all there? Open the SRC folder. I'll just go gently because we have so many folders here of our Express and so
Where did you get the
open the client folder. Once you open the client folder, you open the SRC folder. There's a folder called SRC in that client folder. So once you open it, there's an index.html file there, right? Open the index.html file. This will be our manifest, where everything goes, what you want to appear on the page goes. So the next, we will install, we'll do some installation at the terminal. So if you go to your terminal, if you go back to the terminal, we will change our directory to client, so CD client. Please, if I say client one, don't put one. I am using client one. So go to your terminal. Let me move mine up now. You can just take a look at what you have in your index.html. So you go to the terminal, you change directory to client. So CD client. We want to go into that folder, right? So we'll say CD, mine will be client. So we'll be using Bootstrap. If you don't like Bootstrap, you can use another. So we'll be using Bootstrap to make it faster instead of typing some few things from the beginning. So we are going to install the Bootstrap into that folder, right? If you have changed your directory to that folder, so
Miss, so we have to rename the bookstore to client.
client,
Yeah, okay.
client, please, not client one. Rename it to client. So once you have renamed it to client, go to your terminal and change your directory to that folder, CD client. So inside that client folder, we want to do some installation. We'll be adding our Bootstrap and our font awesome.
We're renaming the bookstore folder?
Rename the bookstore folder. That was what I said. Rename the bookstore folder to right click on it, click on rename it as client. Client. Please don't put one there, just rename as client. Client. Once you are done with that, go to your terminal, change your directory to that folder. Client CD space client, enter. So once you press enter, it will tell you already in that directory called client. Okay, so we are going to be installing the Bootstrap for Font Awesome, our jQuery, Popper, and also we'll install the types. That's the support. We add the support type. So we'll use the command npm. Are we all there? Is everybody on the same page? At least for the startup, I want everybody to be on the same page. So npm space install space bootstrap space at font awesome / font awesome -free, using the free version, space jQuery space popper .js space dash or minus, call it minus, save, enter. So if you didn't get it, let me put it up. Space install space bootstrap, no bootstrap. Space at font. The first one is font, F-O-R-T, font awesome. /font awesome -free space jQuery space popper space popper popper.js space dash we'll also be installing the types for the jQuery popper and the bootstrap. So we have npm space install. So we are installing the types. Remember we talked about types this morning as well. npm space install space at types / jQuery at types / jQuery space at types / bootstrap. Bootstrap. Press enter. So I'll put that for install this as types / jQuery space at types / bootstrap. I hope we all got that. No error. So I just hold on for some of us that are still typing. Okay. Okay, so if you go to the SRC folder, right? So let's just look at some few things we have there. Go to the SRC folder. We have should have the angular.json file, right? SRC folder. Once you open it, you have the app, asset, environment. Keep scrolling down, you see the angular.json file. So the angular.json file is our core file that we'll be using. So you have to be careful what you do here, right? So it's like, it's a core where all our core files will be. We have created styles, we are going to be adding the styles, we are going to be adding the scripts here, right? So in the angular.json file, remember we have we are using Bootstrap, right? We are using Bootstrap. We have installed Bootstrap. So we are going to put in this style, we are going to bring in the Bootstrap. You should use Bootstrap as a style here, right? So go to where you have styles. Styles. So after the opening of the bracket, before the source styles.css, if you look at the default one that we have there, we should have styles somewhere here. SRC styles.css. It's using this, it's reading this, right? It's reading this, but we have installed our Bootstrap. So we are going to, and the Bootstrap we installed, if you go to that client folder, we have the node modules there. In the node modules, if you open that node modules, you should be able, if you scroll down, let's see whether we see our Bootstrap there. If you scroll down, you should have our Bootstrap. So if you scroll down, you see your Bootstrap folder. Do you get that? So we are going to add it as a style that is going to use, because inside that Bootstrap folder, if you open it, there is a style. There is a style there. Okay, let's open the Bootstrap. We have a CSS, or inside the dist folder. Inside the dist folder, we have a folder called CSS. If you open that CSS, we have all the Bootstrap So we are going to be using the bootstrap which says main.css. Main.css. So we are going to add the path here, right? So we add that, you should use that style to go one step up, right into the node modules folder. Remember the style we want to use now is in that node modules folder. Node_modules / we have it in the bootstrap. So we just read that part. Is in the dist folder, and in the dist folder we have the CSS folder, and in that CSS folder we'll be using the bootstrap .main.css. So once you close that, once open and close quote, so you end that with comma. Right? So still in that style, press enter. We added the fourth awesome, right? So we want to add the first awesome to the fourth awesome we created in the modules. Also have the CSS that we'll be using. So you can check that as well. Let me close the bootstrap. Let's look for fourth EF fourth. Let's see where we have it. So we are going to add the fourth awesome as well. Add fourth awesome. Okay, let me just add it. So it's inside the node modules folder. So if you go to node modules, node_modules, I'm trying to go back to the folder, node modules. Inside the node modules, we have fourth, ABCDEFG. At fourth should be at the top. Okay, at should be at the top. At fourth awesome folder, right? So we have the at fourth awesome folder. In that at fourth awesome folder, we have the CSS. We have the CSS, and we have the all folder, and we have the all.main. This is what we are going to be using, all.main.css. So let's read that part. Sorry, I'm here with me. So your quotes, so you read it, node_modules / is in at fourth awesome / font awesome -free. Remember we are using the free version, / CSS / all. We are using the all.main.css. So after that you put a comma too. So we're still using, we are still adding the, so don't take this off, just leave it, the CSS style we have there by default, we still leave it there. Right. So we can save that. So make sure you save all what we have done. Okay. So we'll go back to our source folder, the SRC folder. We'll create another folder called content. So let me close all of this. Let me close. So we have the SRC folder. So the SRC folder. So if you have open, try and be closing it so that. So on the SRC folder, we'll create another folder called content. So right click on the SRC folder. We create a new folder and we'll call that folder content. Content. Right. So we'll move the style folder. So we have a style folder, style.css. We'll move this style into that content. So click and drag this into content, drop it inside the content folder. Click on move. So we have our CSS into it. So since we have moved it now, we have moved the style.css, right? So if you look at the path now, is in source. We have moved it to a folder called content, so we need to read that. So go back to this style in the angular.json file. This style that we have there, src / is now in content folder / css, style.css. Did we all get that?
Do we need double slash?
Huh?
Double slash?
Do we need?
Choose slash before style.
Oh no, one, sorry. There's one. Sorry for that. Right. I hope we all know what we did. We moved the style, the default style that we have there, .css, into a new folder we created, content. And you know it's also using that style, so we need to read that part. Right. So we'll go to the SRC folder again. We're going to create another folder called scripts, where all our scripts, where we're going to embed our TypeScript or JavaScript. So go back to the SRC folder, right click on the SRC folder, create a new folder, and I'll call that new folder scripts. Scripts. So after that, we still go back to our JSON. Make sure your angular.json file is still open. Right. So after the style, we have scripts here, right? So we are going to be adding the script, the jQuery script that comes with Bootstrap, right? The jQuery script that comes with Bootstrap. Go to that. If you go to that Bootstrap Fort Awesome, you have that. So we're going to add in a script that comes with that. So if you go to the script, just press enter. So we'll read the part. Is in the node modules _modules. Okay. Modules / jQuery / is in a folder called this / jQuery .main.js you use your comma, so make sure you read that part very well. It's in node _modules / jQuery. We check that node modules folder, we have our jQuery folder, we have this folder, and inside that we have jQuery.main.js. enter. We'll also add the bootstrap main.js for bootstrap. This is for jQuery. So we have that node underscore modules / bootstrap / dist / js / bootstrap .main.js. So you end that with comma, or we need a comma now. This is the last sentence, so you might not need a comma there. Right. So make sure it's correct. And make sure you close your quotes. Right. So are we all there? And save. Okay. So we will also go back to the, remember we created a folder called scripts, right? So we'll right click on the script folder and we'll create a new file. So this is our script folder that we just created. Right click on it and click on new file. New file. It's a file we are creating now, not a folder, right? So click on new file. You call that file app.js. So press enter. So once you open the app.js file, we are going to create a little script here to be able to launch this application. So create a new script there. So just create an immediate invoke function expression for that, and we will add it. Let's see if we can be able to complete this before our time and add it. So I'll put a comment there. IIFE, the meaning is immediately invoked function expression. Right. So open our bracket and I'll create an anonymous function to execute what we call function start. Enter. So once it starts executing that function, it should log it in the console. We'll say console.log. It should log it in the console of our browser window. App started. So we're going to use that to test it. Then we end that with semicolon. So after that, we'll add event listener to the window so that when the window loads, it will execute this function called start. So we say window dot add event listener. So when the page loads, it will execute this function. Remember, we have a function by name start. So let me just copy that name. by name start. And read that anonymous function. Right, so you save that. So we'll go back to the Angular, our angular.json file. So we have to add in the angular.json file when the window is loading to come and execute the whole of this app.js in the script folder, right? So let's open the angular.json file. So you scroll down to where you have your scripts, right? So we are going to read the path to that script. The script is in the script folder, and the name of the script is app.js, right? So after this, you put a comma here, then after that, remember, is in src source folder, and in that source folder we have the script. So make sure the spelling is right. If you have added an S to that script, make sure you add it /. The name of that script you want it to execute is app.js. Right. So save this. Okay. So once you save this, we will now go back to the terminal. We are trying to launch this application, right? And what we ask you to execute is to execute that function start in the app.js. And we say it should display app started. So to run this, I hope we are all on the same page, right? So to run this, let's go to the terminal, right? So at the terminal, you say ng, remember ng represents the application, right, the Angular. ng space sat space -- open. So we want it to open that application. So if you press enter, okay, so it says, will you like to share the pseudonymous usage data about this project with the Angular team at Google under, do we all have it? Okay, so just say yes, we want to share it, if there's any issue. So global setting, to enable the global setting, it will enable the local setting and also the effects tip status. So it's generating the application. Let me move this up. So just hold on for it. It's generating. If your system is slow, just got to be patient. Just as open. So fast. Let me see. Right, so you have the Angular. So it has opened. So just bear with my system. Has it opened for everyone? Not yet. They are still on the same level as I am. So, but just be patient. Right. So it will launch the Angular for us, and our page is up. We are going to add in the nav bar and all the pages and the content, right, as we go. So you can inspect the page. You can inspect the page. You can right click. Remember we said once it opens this, it should put in the console of our browser window app started. So you can check that, right click. You can inspect, or click on inspect. If you click on inspect, Then you click on console. Right, console. So you should have app started. App started. Do we all have that? Do we all have that? You don't have it. So what's sorry. I can't put on my glasses. App started, so I'll just go around and check. So if you're having errors, let me know so that because we need to get this right, we are building on this, right? So we need to get it right. Okay, how is working? Let's see. Why are you having error? Let's see the error message. You're having error as well, but it's still loading. Maybe there's a spelling error. Check the error. Check the error. Maybe there's a spelling error. You discover the error. Okay, come proceed. I'm trying to see where you have your error. Use that app data. You need to go to. Yeah, I can go to the error. Yeah. So who else is having an error? Who else? Everyone good? On the same page? Well, check the error message. Check the error message. If it's your Bootstrap, check the error message and locate where it is. You shouldn't have any error at this point so that we can have a good. Okay, so that. Okay, let's see. But you are able to get this to work. Okay, but still check so that we have that. So we have to put the outside. Let's check the time. Oh, what's the time now? Wow. Okay. So we'll end the class here for today. It's 10:30. We are sorry. So we need to allow others to come in. Okay. So we'll continue next time. So if you have any errors, please log and make sure we are on the same page, please. Sorry, I didn't know the time was up. Please tell them to come in. If they are for this class, tell them we are already in, right?